Tihei mauri ora. Whakarongo e te iwi, ki te reo o pōwhiri e karanga nei. Piki mai, kake mai. Piki mai, kake mai. Mauria mai o mate. Mauria mai o aitua, kia tangihia e tātou. Koutou o te wāhi ngaro. Takoto mai rā. Koutou, kua whiturangitia, ki ngā rangi tūhāhā. Moi mai rā, moi mai rā. Rātou o te wāhi ngaro kia rātou. Tātou te kanohi ora, e tau nei, e mihi nei. Nau mai, whakatau mai rā. Whakatau mai rā, i raro i te maru, o tō tātou whare, o te papatonga rewa. Tau mai rā, i raro i te mana o te whare, o rongo whakata. Tau mai rā, i raro i te mana o te whenua, o te atiawa, o taranaki whānui. Hara mai rā, i raro i te reo karanga o te kaupapa nei, e kia nei te raurau tātāritanga. Koutou, kua tai mai, no ia pito, no ngā haue whā o te motu, nau mai rā i raro i te aroha, nau mai rā i raro i te humārie. Nau mai rā i raro i nei kupu kōrero e arataki nei i tō tātou nei hui. Nāku te raurau, nau te raurau, ka ora te iwi. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā rā tātou katoa. All yours, Colin.
Tēnā koe, and thank you, Ruka. So I have the great honour today to welcome you on behalf of the Te Roro Tā Tiritanga program leaders and our partners, the Social Wellbeing Agency, the National Science Challenge, Healthier Lives, and Insight Analytics, to this, what I believe is the first Innovations in Applied Data Symposium. Certainly, maybe New Zealand, Wellington, definitely this room, I think. So I also have the pleasure of launching our research program website. So I'd like you to all, if you get a chance, to have a look. It's www.tororo.org, and Tororo spelling is on here. And our team have been working really hard in this, our first year of an ambitious 3-year data science research program. And we hope today's event will actually become a regular in the meetings program. I'd like to introduce over in this table down here to our program leaders. It's Barry Milne and Andrew Sporle, and also Ben Ewan. And if you don't know me, I'm Colin Simpson. I'm at Victoria University of Wellington, and I'm the science leader of the program. I'd also like to welcome some of our team members. We have Dr. Tom Elliott. And Tom actually graduated yesterday, got his PhD yesterday, so congratulations, Tom. Well done to you. And I'd also like to introduce Eileen Lee and Nikki Wilkinson is also in the room somewhere, I can't see her, who are our PhD students. And also, I don't know whether Tori Diamond is here, but Tori Diamond, yeah, she's remote. Oh, perfect. Hi, Tori. And she did a summer studentship with us as well. So, and finally, also our governmental agency partner, the Social Wellbeing Agency team are here. There's a few of you in the room. Fantastic, put your hands up there. Good. The need from our sector to provide innovative advanced analytics means that we need access to high quality, timely, and accessible data from our national data resources. It's really pleasing to see so many people here today. And we hope that you use this event to meet, network, and learn a bit about our community. I really hope this can be a springboard to ensure that New Zealand can be global leaders in data-driven innovation. I'll now hand over to Andrew, who'll tell you a bit about the plan for today, some housekeeping, and introduce our first keynote speaker. Thanks very much.
Kia ora hu mai koutou. Ko ni Sporle toko inga no Ngāti Apa rangatane me te rarawa hau. Kia ora ki te whanaunga nei. Nā mai haere mai ki te papa. This is a really exciting event, and as Colin said, we hope that it is going to be a precursor for an annual event, or at least a biennial event. Because what today is about learning, meeting, and sharing. And that is why we've called this particular event with the whakatauki about roro, about sharing food and surviving and thriving together. But before we start, there's some some housekeeping. Please put your phones on silent, right? We have a fantastic app, which if you haven't downloaded yet, you can find on Yap, right? And that enables you to look at both the program and the presentations that have been submitted. A little bit of housekeeping in terms of if there's an earthquake, you're in one of the safest buildings in Wellington. So stay put and follow instructions. If there's a fire, slightly different, go out the way you came as quickly as possible, but while walking, so please don't run, even if you've got little legs like me, right? Just make it safe, make a safe exit through these doors and down the stairs, and please gather in the car park by Cable Street. If you need to depart for any reason, can you please check in with registration or check out with registration, and that's both for health and safety reasons in case there is an emergency, but also for COVID tracing because they're doing all the tracing for COVID. For those, when you need the loos are beyond reception, out by the stairs and the lifts, and turn left. If you have any other questions about anything else, please just go and see the wonderful Nikki and her team at the registration desk. So as I said, this event is all about learning, meeting and sharing. There's lots and lots of really exciting things going on in the data space in New Zealand, but it's actually really hard to find out about what's going on, even in your own area. So what we have arranged is 3 keynotes. We've got 57 high-speed talks, but there is lots and lots and lots of time for catch-up, and that's deliberate, because we want you to network, we want you to meet, we want you to ask questions of your colleagues, and we want you to develop ideas that are going to shape the future of data science in New Zealand. So to assist with that, we've got some clustered themes in terms of the project, but we've also got some discussion tables. So during morning tea or lunch or anything, and if you want to go and talk about a particular theme, look for the little sign on one of the tables out here, and you'll be able to meet people who are interested in talking about the same things. So remember, with these talks are quick sales pitches, but for you to describe your work, how cool it is, and let people know where they can get more information. For those speakers who have already submitted their PowerPoints, you've got to do nothing else. Everything's all been loaded. If you haven't submitted it yet, then please see the tech team in your room as soon as possible. But again, for everybody else, if you have any other issues, then please see Nikki and her team. It is my great pleasure to announce our first keynote. Kylie is one of the leading data scientists in New Zealand. She's one of the leading applied data scientists in New Zealand, but her career is kind of the kind of eclectic work stream that we see in a lot of people working in this space. She actually started as a marine scientist. She's gone through various government agencies. She's done a degree of postgraduate study in statistics, and now she's the chief executive of Nicholson Consulting, but she's here today to talk to us about weaving together culture and data science. Nā mai haere mai, Kylie.
E ngā mana, e ngā reo, e ngā tani whao, te auraraunga, nau mai, haere mai, piki mai. Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko te mea tuatahi, māku e mihi kau ana ki Ranginui ki runga, kia papatuanuku e takoto nei. Tuarua, ka mihi ki te mana whenua o te wāhi nei, ati awa, e e kāhui tōtara nei tēnā kōrua. He uri o Ngāti Kahanuni ki Wairarapa me Rangitāne me Ngaitahu Hoki, ko Kylie Reiri tōku ingoa, e mahi ana au ki Nicholson Consulting. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. At Nicholson Consulting, we are changing the way Aotearoa and the world uses data. Our vision is analytics for the good of our communities. That is, analytics, data, data science, research, information. It can all be used for the good of our communities. This means we tackle issues that really matter to us, tackling poverty head-on with facts, highlighting barriers that exist in our systems that continue to exclude our rangatahi and prevent them from succeeding within it. The revival of our Indigenous cultures and ways of knowing and being, tackling the climate crisis, the biggest issue to face our generation. These are the things that bring us to mahi every day, and data is simply one of the tools that we have in our toolbox. Now, over the last 10 years, you would have all heard terms about how data is the new oil and data is the new gold. And I do not like these terms. I don't like them because they express the notion that data is a resource that should be used to extract power and profit. There is a better way to use data, and that is as a force for good. Now, it's not just about the work that we do, it's not just about the what. It's also about how we work. How we work is as important, if not more important, than the work that we do. So today, I'm here to extend a personal invitation to every single person in this whare to join with us on this journey. I don't think any vision that is worthy should be exclusive. I think we should share in this journey for collective strength and collective power. So I'm here to invite you to come on this journey with us, stand on our shoulders if you need to, so we can all use analytics for the good of our communities. Now today, I'm really confident that you're going to hear some of these themes come through in the talks. At 11:45, we have Pip Bennett from my team speaking about forecasting that we've done of Te Reo Māori to ensure we can invest to make sure Te Reo Māori continues to flourish for our tamariki and our mokopuna. Now, I'm also grateful to the conference organisers who have given Pip 2 back-to-back slots so she can do her talk tuatahi I Te Reo Pākehā, tuarua, ka huri ia ki Te Reo Māori. On our panel this afternoon, we've got one of our analytics leads, Ben Ritchie, also talking about analytics for social good. And straight after me, we have Peter Lucas-Jones speaking. And Peter, every time I hear you speak about your kaupapa, it gives me joy to see Aotearoa leading once again. So kei te mihi, Peter. So we've been on this journey of data for social good for a while now. And while I'll be the first to stand up and admit that we don't always get it right, we are learning a heck of a lot along the way. So today, I'm going to share with you some of the things that we are doing in the hope that there's something in here that you can take away for your mahi too. My perspectives, the foundation of my perspectives, will always have people at the centre. And at the centre of people is culture. And so I'm going to set the talk today in this idea about the value of weaving culture through data science. And I'll start with a story. So this week, on Tuesday, we had a whānau ui ui at my tamariki's puna reo. And a whānau ui ui, I guess, is like a parent-teacher night, except all the whānau come together and we spend time and we share kai and that kind of thing. And at the moment, Victoria University is engaged in some research to understand how tamariki in their early years learn multiple languages. And they're doing some research where they come into the centre and they film the tamariki to understand how they're learning language. And the university sent out a pānui to the whānau and the kāko of the space, and it basically said that 2 Pākehā were going to come and capture our tamariki on film. You can imagine what the collective response was from Kayako and whānau. It was a no, not without a kaupapa Māori approach to that, given it's such a sacred space to us. And so they brought in this just incredible young wahine Māori who's just finished her studies in Te Reo and Māori studies at Victoria University. And so she came to the whānau ui and spent time with the whānau. And in that space, we got into a really deep discussion about what is Māori data sovereignty. And we talked about it in the context of her work, about what it means to express kaitiakitanga over data and care for it and protect it for many generations. And we talked about the concept of what makes data more tapu or more noa, and we said, if you're going to come into the space and record our children on film, what is the benefit back to our children in doing that? If the benefit is simply that you have a resource to take back into university that makes it easier for you to transcribe, then no. The benefit of that is not sufficient for the type of data you're collecting. You could simply sit in the centre for longer and you could transcribe some notes and take those with you, and that's much safer data for you to collect. But if the benefit of recording tamariki speaking Te Reo Māori is that it allows for a more robust peer review process over your research, and therefore more robust research leads to better research that can feed back into the puna about how we teach our children to speak multiple languages at such a young age, then maybe it warrants doing that. But it was more about a discussion of weighing up on balance, the type of information they were collecting and what they planned to do for it, proportionate to the value that we would get back. Anyway, I'm sharing this story because it's a conversation that I have with many people that have spent their long careers in IT, analytics, and the data area, from DCEs, DepSecs, CTOs, many of whom, if I'm honest, struggle with the concept of how you take principles from Te Ao Māori and you apply them in a practical way to the mahi that you do. Anyway, she wouldn't have been more than 22, and at the end of the conversation, a deep conversation, she looked at me and goes, "It just sounds like common sense." And it made me laugh, because it made me laugh at the simplicity of it, because I think that's exactly what it is. And so the reason I decided to start this in the context of weaving together culture and data science is because, to me, this is just common sense. I believe that Te Ao Māori can teach us a lot about how to have a sustainable, compassionate and mana-enhancing society, and this is one of the more powerful things that we use to make sure we live our vision. So today I'm going to keep it quite simple. I've got 2 pieces of advice for analysts and 2 pieces of advice for the leaders or the future leaders in the room. I've deliberately positioned it as advice, not because I expect you to take it all. You can take it or leave it, kei a koe, kei a koutou. But I've positioned it as advice because I know sometimes people find it difficult to take abstract concepts like principles and apply them in a practical way. So I've positioned it advice simply to make it practical for you to understand. So let's get into it. We'll start with the analyst. So if you're an analyst, I would like you to start thinking about using an opportunities lens for people and a deficit lens for systems. Especially for those of you that work with administrative data, to start thinking hard about what administrative data is telling you. Administrative data is telling you how a system functions. It's not telling you anything about the aspirations of people. It's not telling you about how successful they are at achieving the outcomes you're trying to measure. It's telling you how a system functions. So, next time you're working with administrative data, instead of saying Māori are more likely to drop out or fail at tertiary education, instead you could say Māori are continually excluded from tertiary education because of the continued privilege of Western knowledge and Western systems. Instead of saying Māori are overrepresented in our prisons and our justice sector, you could say Māori face higher rates of surveillance in our communities. Instead of saying we need to fix our rangatahi, you could say we need to fix the barriers that exist in the system that continually prevent them from succeeding within it. When the same groups of people continue to fail in Aotearoa, there comes a time where we all need to step back and ask ourselves, what is so broken about our systems that they simply do not work for some people? A typical government response to this is to have a group called a priority population or priority audience, a population of interest, and it's always the same. It's Māori, it's Pacifica, it's people living with disabilities. And it's funny language because I've been forced to use it myself working in government spaces, and I can just imagine going home to my whānau and telling them all that, hey, we're priority population. They wouldn't have a clue what that meant. Anyway, the point of that is I really hate that language, and I hate it because it places the blame and the responsibility for solutions on those people. Instead, they should sit on the system. We don't need to fix our people. We need to fix the systems that continually view them through a deficit lens and continually exclude them from opportunities. If you're an analyst, tip number 2, be more than ethical, and I might have to explain this one. I feel like the conversation about ethics has stagnated in Pōneke. It was probably about 5 years ago that I stood on a stage in the same whare talking about data ethics, and I don't feel like the conversation has moved on. I've seen lots of organisations and departments release different principles about what it means to be ethical and what it means to use data safely. And I understand how it doesn't move on because really all ethics is as in our cultures and in our societies, it's the collective way that we view things to be right or wrong. And that in and of itself is subjective. But I haven't seen the conversation move on, and I feel like it's stagnating in this place of risk and minimising risk. Now, an ethical and risk-based lens is always appropriate, but what I would like to see more of is the other side of that coin. What does it look like when we think about the values and principles that we can express from Te Ao Māori and apply that to our work? What does it look like when we try to show manaakitanga through our work in data science? How do we raise the mana of the people in our data through the mahi that we do? For kaitiakitanga, how do we care for our data over multiple generations? Whakapapai, how do we acknowledge where data has come from and what it's showing us? And you can refer back to my previous slide for that. I would like to see more of the conversation sit at that end of the spectrum. And an example is you can think about one of Google's values. Google has a value of don't be evil. And when I think about a value like that, my gosh, it's like they've chosen literally the worst thing that you could be as a human and set that as their benchmark. They're not saying, aim to be a force for change for this world, aim to be great. You know what, don't even aim to be good. Just aim to do the very minimum to prevent yourself from being the worst human in the world. And I'm worried that our conversation about ethics is sitting there, and I would like to see it at the other end of the spectrum. So for all the analysts in the room, you can be more than ethical. Ethical is the bare minimum, and you can do so much more than that. Now, for the leaders or the future leaders in the room, my first piece of advice is about creating culturally safe spaces because power comes from the collective. This is probably my favourite thing to talk about because I believe that if you want to get the most out of your people, if you want to see them doing the best work of their lives, every single leader needs to step up and take responsibility and accountability for creating spaces where people can thrive. I can talk about this from my own personal experience. So I'm a wahine Māori, I have a master's in statistics, and I've worked as a data scientist for a number of government and other organisations. And I can honestly tell you that I have never felt in any of my previous roles that I could bring my full cultural superpowers to the work that I do. I would even go as far to say that I couldn't honestly put my hand on my heart and say that I was 100% proud of the work that I did in those spaces, because they were Western spaces, and the way that work was given to me was almost not just dictated what I would be doing, but how I would be doing it. And so we're trying to change that, and we're thinking hard about it. So I'm just going to run through a few of the real things that we are doing in the hope that there might be something for the other leaders in the room. You might be a leader of an organisation, a leader of a team, or a peer leader. So firstly, I guess it starts with the fact that we are willing to completely challenge the status quo, like the very fabric of what an organisation should be. This plays out in how we think about our policies and our processes. We do not take things off the shelf. We think hard and we listen to our staff about what they need, not only to do the best work of their lives, but to live their best lives. And we write our processes and policies to support that. It extends to our recruitment, where we don't expect our staff to have the biggest qualifications from the fanciest tertiary institutes, because there is no hierarchy in access to education. We know from research that in a job ad, men are more likely to apply for a job when they have fewer of the things listed, the kind of requirements for the role, and they're more likely to negotiate for pay. And this directly leads to gender pay and position imbalance in organisations. So the way that we tackle that is quite simple. We make it very clear when people apply for roles with us that they do not need to know everything about everything. We're looking for the special things about people, and we'll take responsibility as an organisation to create space for learning everything else. For pay, it's simple. Put it on your job ads. Just say what it is. Why don't more people do this? Because if you don't, all it does is leave people guessing. You know, respect the mana of people who are your future potential whānau in your organisation. Respect that process. And all it does is it leaves people guessing, and it leads to more males negotiating. It also extends to our job descriptions. You know, job descriptions are necessary because part of creating a high-functioning team is having clear expectations about what someone's role is, while also recognising that not all data scientists are equal, and nor should they be. When people are able to do more of what they love, they will be good at it. And that's basic common sense. So with our job descriptions, we're trying to strike a balance between creating clear expectations about what a role is while leaving enough flexibility for people's superpowers to shine. It flows through into our induction, where when we bring people into our organisation, we do require that we're starting with the shared foundational sense of values. Whilst at the same time, it's not all about, I see a lot of job ads have words like cultural fit. For us, it's not about expecting that people will change to suit our culture. It's about recognising the opportunity that every individual brings when they walk into our organisation, that it's a room for our culture to grow so we can truly be a collective space. It extends to the way that we empower people to have new ideas, to give us feedback, our willingness to listen and action it. And it also extends to our values. One of the values we have as an organisation is that we succeed as a team. And this is because we know the power is in the collective. And as an example of this in action, we often have clients come to us and they say, could you please give us a Māori data scientist to work on something high profile? High profile is usually code for having failed Māori in the past. Our response to that is no. Our response to that is no because many of us have first-hand experience of what it is like working as an analyst, almost at the lowest levels of how these organisations are structured, and trying to reach into the depths of your culture and mixing that with your technical skills and working with a team and having a different view and a different piece of advice to everyone else, and then being responsible for influencing that 10 layers up to the CEO. Not a culturally safe space. Instead, what we offer is a collective response from our organisation where we can focus on everything from the technical details to a strategic approach and piece of advice. Now, and that's also because It's not just about our organisation that needs to be culturally safe. We are a consulting agency. We have our people in other people's spaces, so it's also important that we care for them and protect them there. Now, yeah, so culturally safe spaces, I just think I would sum that up by saying, if you think that you can change the work that you are doing by hiring one or two Māori or Pacifica, you are wrong. I will always advocate for creating employment opportunities in more Māori and Pacifica in data science and tech. But my point is, as leaders, you need to take responsibility for creating culturally safe spaces. The next piece of advice that I have for leaders is to engage for partnerships, and I really hope that this is a really common sense one for everyone in the room as well. But I put it here because I've seen too many people get this one wrong. We work a lot in the social space, and so it requires engagement with tangata whenua. Now, I've seen lots of examples where people will engage with tangata whenua, and their approach is to show up and tell them about what they're doing as an FYI. Maybe showing up is better than not showing up, but still. And I guess my two pieces of advice here, in terms of how you might think about that differently, is think about how you might engage in a new relationship with a partner. You know, you'd have a cup of tea, you'd slow down, you'd get to know each other, you'd have another cup of tea or a wine, you know, slow down, mahi comes later. Why is the same not true for the way that we partner when we're working on mahi that's so important to our communities? The next piece of advice I'd have there is to kind of recognise where power sits. Crucial to any partnership is an even distribution of power between parties. If you're engaging with tangata whenua and it's something to do with data, my best guess from the fact that we're in Pōneke at the moment is you have data. Now, the mere fact that you have data tells me that you've got resources to collect it, to store it, to use it, to do something with it. And that's probably a pretty obvious sign that the power lies with you. So before you engage with tangata whenua, I would recommend thinking about what you are willing to give up to shift the balance of power in those partnerships. Are you willing to give up decision-making power? Are you willing to give up time and resource? Are you willing to give up data itself? Are you willing to give up something else? Because just like if you were in a relationship with someone and you could afford a house and you could afford food, but your partner couldn't, what would you do? You would share so that you could both eat and live in a warm house and live a good lives together. Hopefully common sense again. The last piece of advice that I have is for members of our community when we're working with your data. When we work with your data, hold us to account. Always expect more. Because in the end, we are working with data about you. It is your information. You own it. You are well within your rights to ask, to question, and to know that everything we are doing with it, first and foremost and always, is for the benefit of you. We are in uncharted territory and we won't always get it right, but we will try and we will learn. So when we're working with your data, always hold us to account because we are up for that challenge. Nā reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Kia ora.
There's nothing like an opening talk on an event about talking about the future than a talk that actually lays down some very serious challenges. Right? But if we're going to address the future of data science, we have to address the kinds of issues that Kylie has mentioned in a very upfront and engaged way. In terms of that engagement, we have time for maybe one or two quick questions. No. So is anybody...
Ane. I don't want to do that again.
A question for Kylie. Then a question...
Your last bit about keeping organisations accountable. You got a question about keeping organisations accountable. Maybe some advice or examples around how we could make that possible. I mean, I guess a lot of us who are in the data day to day know the limitations of it, some of the data quality issues, and then maybe some of the recommendations or stuff that's set off the back of that is probably not necessarily in line. So,
Yeah.
What would your advice be?
Yeah, so I'll just give you an example about a recent piece of work that we've done. So we've recently launched something called the Thriving Rangatahi Data Explorer, and it's about democratising data and putting it in the hands of communities to make it available for them to make decisions about themselves, for themselves, without any government support. So it's free, and you can all access it for free on Vodafone Foundation's website. So when we started that mahi, we were engaged with Vodafone Foundation to come up with some data insights to support them with their strategy of halving poverty for rangatahi in Aotearoa. And as part of that, we went to Mōrewa in the far north, we went to Ōtaki, we went to Awanui all the way down in Invercargill. So we travelled the country and we listened to what Māori community organisations had to say. It was very, very obvious that many of them felt that whilst they were happy to contribute to the way that we were analysing and thinking about the data, it would be more useful to them in their hands. And so the whole scope of the project shifted to building a front-end app that they could access for free to make the decisions about themselves and for themselves. As far as the data that went into it, we were very careful to work with them to put that in a framework of Māori wellbeing. So it's not about calling out rangatahi who have had experience in the justice system or with oranga tamariki. It's about saying, when we look at the data, we can see some things have happened to our rangatahi in the past and it is not their fault. But when you're working with them, it's important to recognise them so you know how to support them well. Also, there are things in the data that are possible to change for them and help them with in the future. So it was a very deliberate kind of positioning of that in a framework of Māori wellbeing, and the whole scope of the project changed because when we went out to engage, we were willing to listen in a genuine way and change the scope of our project so it benefited them and not just the mahi that we were doing.
One more question. Quick question from the floor. To what extent should that learning and development come from within an organisation, a Crown organisation, or should the Crown organisation be looking to bring lessons and opportunities to learn from outside?
I think it's both and, but always start in your own whare, recognise where your people are and spend time and resource and commitment to growing and supporting them just like you would members of your own whānau. I don't know why it needs to be different.
Thank you very much, Kylie.
Kia ora.
I might te paki for challenges. And of course, these talks are being recorded so you can actually watch them later if you feel that there's anything that you've missed or you want to go back and hear again. Thank you for opening this event up with such an inspirational talk. Kia ora. It is now my great pleasure to welcome a distant whanaunga of mine from one of the greatest little iwi up north. But Peter Lucas Jones is a path cutter. He's one of the people making a real difference in the data science world and leading by example. But since coming back to Aotearoa, he's become the Deputy Chair of Māori TV. He's the Chief Executive Officer of Te Hiku Media, doing things very different and very well up north. He's at the cutting edge of national, international and Indigenous data science. But he's here to talk about that world-leading work, and he's here to talk about papareo. So nau mai, haere mai, Peter Lucas Jones.
Tai hoa. Tēnā koutou katoa o tira e mihi ana hau ki ngā tāngata whenua o tēnei takiwā, taranaki whānui te ātiawa tēnā koutou. E ngā kaiwhakahaere o tēnei kaupapa, i tēnei rā, tēnei au ka mihi kia koutou. E hihi ana hau te mihi kia Kylie. He rangatira te whakarongo atu ki ngā kōrero ko kōrero hia e tēnei wahine toa. So I just want to acknowledge everybody here today, say thank you for having me, and the tangata whenua from here, te Ātiawa. Imagine being the tangata whenua in a city like this, surviving in a place like this, holding on to your identity. And that's what I want to talk about today. So thank you all so much for having me here today. I'm talking about papareo. That's a kaupapa that was awarded funding by MB. We're always so excited to thank our funder because it really helps get things moving. But before that, there's so much to acknowledge. There's so much to acknowledge because without a kaupapa, it's really hard to find a platform, whether it's now or in the future. And so we always like to take a moment to reflect. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about, of course, automatic speech recognition, but in particularly Indigenous automatic speech recognition. And it's about more than just recognizing speech. It's about people. It's about our place. And it's about our identity. So why do we exist? I really just want to grab a mic and walk around. But I'm stuck here. Okay, so why do we exist? Well, we all know about colonization of Aotearoa. And if you don't know, you need to find out. Because that's on you. You live here. And when you are in a minority in your own lands, it's quite different to being a minority in a different context. We are a minority in our own tribal homelands, and that has an impact. What has the impact been? Language loss and cultural decline as a result of systemic racism. And what do? Well, we are here to promote our language and our culture. And when I talk about Māori language, I'm talking about intergenerational transmission of language and culture, which has, by and large, been terribly interrupted by the systems and the policies of years gone by. What are we doing? We're doing everything that we can to make our language more ubiquitous. But how do we do that whilst holding on to the integrity of the kaupapa and contributing to the government's ambitious goal of 1 million Māori language speakers by 2040. Aroha mai. I had my COVID vaccination the other day because we're a priority population. No hea mātou. Well, we are 30 years old now. We are 30 years old. We are the iwi broadcasting hub of Ngāti Kuri, Te Aupōuri, Ngai Takoto, Te Rarawa, and Ngāti Kahu. Why do we exist? Because people fought and struggled. We are a monument to the critical Māori rights movement of the 1970s right up to now. And what does that mean? Well, we can't talk about that without talking about Y11, the Te Reo Māori claim. And then, of course, there was the Y claim 150, which was about our Māori language frequencies, radio frequencies. And then Y262, Māori language as a taonga, intellectual property. If you don't know about that, find out. Te reo irirangi o te hiku o te ika. That is the name of our organisation. Our vision, he reo tuku iho, he reo ora. Our mission, whakatōkia poipoia kia mato te reo Māori o ngā haukāinga o te hiku o te ika. That is not a translation. That is an interpretation. And every time we deal with different kaupapa, or we deal with different topical issues or current affairs or key issues, we look and we revisit and remind ourselves of the whakaaro or the ideas that sit behind our vision and our mission. And we apply that in whatever context that we need to find a way through. Like I mentioned before, we've been gathering data for 30 years. Now, in 30 years, as a Māori language community organization, we have developed trust and accountability. Trust and accountability is so important when you're dealing with data. And I'm not talking about numbers. I'm talking about history. I'm talking about stories. I'm talking about every tree, every rock, every maunga, every river. I'm talking about our eponymous ancestors. I'm talking about genealogy. I'm talking about these cassette tapes. And I'm talking about these kuia, born in the 1890s, that decided they wanted to start recording their kōrero. My own grandmother, my father's mother, sitting there on the right, like left or right, which one is it? And then, of course, my grandaunts. And I always like to remind ourselves of whakatauki, or those proverbs. E hoki whakamuri, kia anga whakamua. You got to look back to look forward sometimes. So that's what we did. And we took the opportunity to create a website, a whare kōrero, a digital platform that provided access to content, Māori language content. Why? Because 85% of our people do not live in our tribal homelands anymore. Why? Because people have been part of the urban migration. Now, the urban migration of Māori people into the cities in the 1960s, it had a huge impact on identity, language, and culture. And so broadcasting terrestrially means that you can actually sort of provide access within a geographic area. Developing our platform for us meant all of a sudden providing access to Indigenous content to anyone, anywhere in the world. Kapahaka, our young people, our rangatahi, and kapahaka, nothing competes with the engagement that you can get through kapahaka. We recently broadcast live this kapahaka event in Whangarei. We had a bounce rate of 17.5% and hold people on our whare kōrero on average for almost 15 minutes. That's a long time to keep someone on a digital platform, and they go to at least 4 other pages. So that tells you they are coming with purpose. Our elders, our mātua, our kaumātua, our rangatahi, our whānau, our hapu, our iwi. It's all intergenerational. We started to look at how we could provide access to language content. How do we provide and contribute to the language journey of people that are learning te reo Māori, regardless of them being members of our iwi. They could be new immigrants. They could be Pākehā whānau that have been here for 5 generations. We want to provide a positive impact. So we looked to our elders, and we'd been talking to our elders for 30 years about this stuff. What we did is we decided we wanted to transcribe these archival pieces. Why? Because they were exceptionally entertaining while being informative. Can you imagine writing out, transcribing native speaker archives? Now, the reo of our haukainga is quite different to the language that we might find in universities. Be that as it may, we wanted to provide access to te reo o te kāinga. And so what we did was tag and label this sort of data. tagging and labeling this sort of data, looking at idiomatic expressions, looking at colloquialisms, preferred words. What was the grammatical structure? Were they talking about a marae? Did we tag that awa? That awa comes up several times. Ooh, that kuia is talking about the bark on that tree again, and the way it is used, and the medicinal purposes that it is used for. This is all data. And so what we did was create a digital matrix. Oh, that kaumātua spoke about that bark as well. And so did that kaumātua. So what we developed was a way to connect these dots so that we could provide real-life examples, not only in te reo Māori, but about things that people are significantly interested in. But can you imagine doing that all manually? Can you imagine that? There is a small pool of people that know how to do this sort of stuff. And so it was much easier for us to start teaching computers how to speak Māori. Why? I'll tell you why. Because it's about revitalization. It's about preservation and the promotion of te reo Māori. Like Kylie said, we're all about creating opportunities for our people to grow and develop in the future. And we want to be an example for other Indigenous people to show that we can be the leaders of our own preferred future. We do not need saviors. What we need is people to make some space. And sometimes when people have taken space for such a long time, the whole idea of making space is very confronting, but it doesn't need to be. Because when we look at how we achieved something, what we did was we used open source technology, supported by our passionate community, to create some automatic speech recognition tools. And it was that simple. But where it started was with 30 years of trust and accountability. So what we did is we developed another platform, and this was to collect data. We'd already been collecting data, and we wanted to collect more data, tagged and labelled. We were calling them kapohanga reo, but phrases. And essentially, we had a competition, and it went crazy. We had a reading competition, a Māori language reading competition. And in 10 days, we gathered 316 hours of tagged and labelled utterances, which is pretty unheard of, especially when the project is Māori community led. Our papareo kaupapa, when I say our, I mean all of our. I'm using the tātou and not the mātou. That's a pronoun. But what I'm trying to remind us is that when things are community led, they have a different type of passion. And the ownership of the kaupapa is collective. It's not an individual ownership. So we talk about guardianship. And a lot of times we get asked, who owns the data? Who owns the data? From our perspective, that's a signal of the thinking or the ideology or the philosophical worldview of the person asking the question. Because for us, it's not about who owns the data, it's about who does the data belong to. And I think belonging and ownership are two very different things. And we need to remind ourselves that the Western ideology is all about the me, myself, and I, and how I feel about it. And you're making me feel like this, and it's all about me. Well, what about the we? The us and the we. And I'm talking about this because it reminds us about kaitiakitanga. And that kaitiakitanga is a word you'll hear a lot in Wellington. But what I want us to do is take a step back and think about guardianship versus ownership. And our communities, they trust us to do the right thing. Why? Because we've got 30 years of trust and accountability. How might we license data and technology? Well, we're all about mana motu hake and tino rangatiratanga. So we always look back to te tiriti o Waitangi and he whakaputanga. And those are two founding documents that anyone that wants to work with Māori data needs to take some time and find out about. And the reason I say that is because we're trying to create opportunities for Indigenous people. When we look at the way that we're trying to create jobs, we're trying to create highly skilled jobs, we're trying to be part of a pipeline. We can all be part of a pathway for people that have largely been absent in the different spaces that we are leaders. And I think there's a certain type of leadership that we need to take a moment and reflect on, and that's the servant leader. The servant leader sometimes leads from the back, and we don't really know who the servant leader is. It could be that auntie over there making the kai. It could be that uncle over there sitting at that table. It may not be the person that is speaking. Sometimes the person speaking has already been told what they are to speak about. So servant leadership is quite a different sort of idea that I'd like to just put out there as a thing. Now, if we give tech companies access to the data, they could sell language services back to our people. Now, as we know, Māori language was largely beaten out of the mouths of generations of Māori families in this country. So when we talk about big tech have the resources to commercialize data in ways that whānau, hapu, and iwi don't have. And so when we think about digital real estate and preserving space for the future, we need to think about how we provide opportunities for whānau, hapu, and iwi to grow, not just now, but in the future. Oro tuku iho is something that we're looking at, and we just call it oro tuku iho. But I'm talking about intergenerational transmission of sound. There's also intergenerational transmission of language, of course. But through our competitions, through our data gathering, we've found that pronunciation is a hugely important part of the Māori language learning journey. Good pronunciation, bad pronunciation, good effort, reasonable effort, regardless of what that is, pronunciation, if it's bad, can obscure the meaning of what is trying to be communicated. And so what we found out is that our pronunciation of Te Reo Māori and Aotearoa has largely been impacted by colonization and the influence of the dominant language, English. And so we're talking about speaking native sound back into our future. And when we look at that, our treasure trove of recordings and the phonetical data that is captured there with 30 years of our kuia, kaumātua, our relations, all providing kōrero, what we have is some amazing data to label. Now, so for example, someone might read this. I konei, ka whakatika atu ngā manuwhiri, ka waiata, ka haka. And so this was a little tool that we developed to mark and label pronunciation, marking up phonemes, marking up vowels, long sounds, short sounds, words that end in a vowel and then the next word starts in a vowel, diphthongs where two vowels follow one another, or words where there might even be three vowels in a row. My point is that this is a special opportunity to tag and label a different type of data and create pronunciation models. So for example, this first one, so like when anyone's learning a language, one often mimics the pronunciation of the proficient speaker that they might be exposed to. And what we wanted to do was provide some real-time feedback on that. So if I was going to, I read this out last night in our production app. So what that says is toko no ngā tāngata. And so when I said it like that, I got a 96% correct score. And then when I said toko ono ngā tāngata, I got a 70% score. So my point is that providing feedback is a really important way to encourage somebody. Instead of telling people what they got wrong, we wanted to look at how we could suggest what people got right and celebrate what people got right and point to the areas that they needed to improve on. And there we have some little numbers that I can't read, but you'll see the red line. When I said toko ono, that clearly showed that toko ono was not correct. And it's really toko ono. And you have two vowels that follow one another there. And I do want to say talo falava to celebrate Samoan Language Week as well. The other thing is, when I said it correctly, I got a higher score. That might not seem like much, but that was a major achievement for us to provide some real-time Māori language pronunciation feedback. And then we started doing our automatic speech recognition, kaupapa, and so we've developed things to a 10% error rate at the moment. So that's our speech to text. And so here are a couple of examples of phrases that I just wrote into I just read them into my app on my phone, which I can't seem to get working on this thing right now. But anyway, so I just took pictures of it. So here I've said, tēnā koutou e ngā iwi o te haukāinga o tēnei takiwa o te whanganui a tara. We created our own alphabet, and one of our staff worked with a number of our wider team, the whānau at Te Hiku Media, to develop a few different alphabets. Why? Because we have some sounds in our language, in Te Reo Māori, that are basically, the orthography is basically two letters, like wh is WH and ngā is NG. So we done a couple of things there to sort of create a bit of a different alphabet. And over here, he mea nui te kōrero kia koutou I tēnei ata. You know, it's a big thing to be here talking about this stuff to you guys this morning. And we got it at a 10% error rate. So that's pretty amazing. It is a large vocabulary speech recognition system, and we recognize now over 60,000 Māori words. And it works pretty good. That worked perfectly when I was talking to it. More recently, we just launched an app called Whare Kōrero. We're members of Te Whakaruru Hau o Ngā Reo Irirangi Māori, as mentioned earlier, and this provides access to the 21 iwi radio stations. Now, it's important to note that this is a new app, and it actually has lots of features and access to information about how to behave in this whare. So what is the tikanga around how you behave in this whare? And who does the data belong to? Who is the kaitiaki or the guardian of the content that is hosted in this whare kōrero? What is a whare kōrero? Whare kōrero is a term that you can find all throughout the Pacific. In Hawaii, you'll have the hale olelo. In different places in the Pacific, you'll find different variations of this whakaaro or ideology. We were given the name of this whare kōrero by Tā Heke Nuku Mai Pūhipi, who was Sir Heke Nuku Mai Pūhipi. My point is, we're not tracking people's personal data. We're simply looking at engagement. Kylie talked about analytics and stuff like that when she was doing. That's the same stuff that we're doing. We don't think it's our place to be interfering or prying and capturing people's personal data. And so we have a special approach to the way that we see the future of this app. But it gives access for the first time to the 21 iwi radio stations on a handheld device. And we actually broadcast more than 80,000 hours of Māori language content every year across the iwi radio network. 80,000 hours. That's more Indigenous language data that is broadcast by any network throughout the world, according to some people. I'm not sure if that is absolutely fact, but it is something for us to perhaps find out a little bit more about. Our kaitiakitanga license. Our kaitiakitanga license is how we license our data and our tech. And basically, it is not open source. Why? Because open source is great for people that have had the privilege to make use of that open source stuff. So our stuff is not open source. Our stuff is governed by our kaitiakitanga license. Why? Like I said, language loss and cultural decline as a result of systemic racism. That's why. So our tech and our data is kind of like, well, our approach to access is like affirmative action for Māori and other Indigenous people. Earlier I talked about making space, taking space, and sometimes we need to give up a little bit of space. Te mana raraunga, if you don't know about te mana raraunga, I want you to please go and check it out. The Principles of Data Sovereignty, it's a 2-pager. Check it out. If you don't know about Indigenous data sovereignty, if you don't know about Māori data sovereignty, read that. It's 2 pages. And you will love it. You'll love it because it's the whakaaro and the ideas around not only what I'm talking about, but what Kylie was talking about earlier too. And why do we have this affirmative action approach to the way that we license data and tech? Because we got to ensure that there's reinvestment back into this kaupapa. And the way that we want to see that happen is by any profits being made from the use of our data going back into the communities that it belongs to. And that brings us to papareo. Because I couldn't talk about papareo and a multi-language platform for te reo Māori, 4 languages, without talking about how we got to where we are. Because it would be very, very hard just to say we turned the tap on and it worked. It was 30 years of hard work. And so we were awarded for, nearly $14 million to work on this kaupapa, a data science kaupapa by MB. And we're very, very grateful that we were the first non-university organisation to achieve this sort of funding, to achieve an award like this. For us, it was showing that all Māori organisations can lead their own research, can lead their own development. We don't need people holding our hands. But there is an idea out there that if you're good at something and you're Māori, who's your Pākehā friend? Oh, they've got that Pākehā working with them. But what I'm saying, this is a reality. And we're talking about breaking stereotypes. We're talking about breaking ceilings. And I know that listening to comments like that can be quite challenging, but it's a reality that we're faced with every time we get in a board meeting room or we get into discussions with people that have been raised to think that we are underachievers. So I always talk about this from the point of view of a whakatauki. And here we say, kua tawhiti kē te haerenga mai kia kaua e haere tonu, he nui ngā mahi kua mahia kia kaua e mahi tonu. We have come too far not to go further. And we have done too much not to do more. And my challenge to the room is help us achieve more. Help us work together. Help us find a preferred future where Māori data is governed and managed in a Māori way. Kia ora mai anō tātou. Tēnā koutou katoa.
Awesome, Cuz. And perfectly on time. Thank you very much. Peter Lucas will be around for the rest of the day in the panel discussion this afternoon. Kylie will hopefully be able to stick around for a little while, but then actually has to go back into the real world. But there we have it, 2 scene-setting, challenging talks about the current pressures of data science, current opportunities of data science, but some really, really interesting paths on which to walk into the future. Now we now we're about to break for morning tea, and straight after morning tea we're heading into our breakout streams. So check the back of your lanyard for the program. Also on your lanyard is the app for the code the code for the app and the Wi-Fi code. If you want to go to Stream A, and especially if you're talking in Stream A, come back here, right? Stream B is in room Rangimarie 1. Stream C is in room Rangimarie 2. And those rooms are near the stairs and bathrooms, and just follow the signage, right? Please make yourself or avail yourself of the free coffee and the good kai and the good conversation and the excellent company, and we'll see you in half an hour. Kia ora.